In case you haven't seen our previous episodes, I'm taking this everyday spec F30 328i and turning it into what I think this car would have been for the factory if BMW kept true to its turbocharged SI roots. Up until this point, we've torn into the engine timing, cooling, and turbocharging systems to make them as rock solid as they can be, and adding a little bit of OEM plus flavor along the way. But now, I'm about to tackle one of the biggest mods this car will get.
Today, I'm going to start moving on to suspension stuff. So I'm going to focus on the front suspension today, and if everything goes smoothly, I will be dropping the rear subframe as well. So today's going to be a big one. The biggest things we're going to try to do, we're going to get the front struts on the Bilstein B16 DampTronics, the F80 M3 control arms, put the tie rods back on, brakes, basically just do a full refresh of the front end. So it's going to be an exciting day. Can't wait to get into it. Definitely be nice to do something different than engine mechanical related stuff. So let's mix it up. Let's have a party. Let's do it. So the big thing I'm going to do here, we're replacing these calipers with literally the same calipers but brand new. These have 100,000 miles on them. I know that these pads have been worn down before. And I believe when I inspected this car, I did see a crack on one of the phenolic pistons. So don't really want to reuse them. So we're literally just putting the same brake kit back on. This is the M Sport brake kit, which is optional from BMW. These also could be installed from the factory. And fun fact about these calipers, these are the exact same calipers that you would see with the iron brake rotors for your F80 M3s, F82 M4s. These are 370 millimeters on this car, but with an F80 M3 knuckle, you can run 380 millimeter rotors. And this caliper is also a pretty big, popular upgrade for other BMWs. Maybe we'll have a video on that later for a different car. The Bilstein B16 DampTronic kit includes the adapters to plug in for the electronic damping control. So really, I'm just gonna go ahead and drop the entire assembly. I'm gonna leave the caliper sitting in the wheel well for now. When I'm actually ready to install the new calipers, I'll just undo the connection here and swap it over as entire assembly. We already have the calipers pre-built, so brand new brake hoses, everything is really pretty much ready to slip on. Yeah, I just decided it's gonna be easier to take the control arms off because I gotta counter hold the freaking studs for the ball joints and stuff. Should be easier to strip this down off the car than it is on the car. I mean, as it is, I got it out. 3 bolts up there, no bolts down here. Now, I'm not reusing these brake hoses, but I also don't want this thing to hang, and I don't want to open up the brake system yet until I'm ready to put the new caliper on. So I'm going to zip tie the caliper up so that it is supported. Also, I don't want anybody on the internet yelling, you can't let it hang by the brake hose. Correct, you can't, because it could stretch the brake hose, it could cause an internal damage. Also, I just don't want to stress this connection up here, even though it is pretty solid. Regardless, we're not reusing. Everything from the hard line down is being replaced. All right, so we're gonna be running the F80 M3 control arms on the front, including the thrust arms. And one thing to mention on the F30s is you can't run the stock F80 inner bushing because it's not sized the same. The F80s use the exact same thrust arm bushing as the E9X M3s. The F30s use a different thrust arm bushing, so what we ended up doing is we're using an F30 Synchro Design Works monoball in the F80 M3 arm. It plugs and plays, adapts it to the F30 suspension, like so, and this is going to allow us to run the full M3 front setup. This is going to give us a little bit extra track width, a little bit extra front camber. With the camber plate, we should be able to run a decent amount of front camber to preserve tire wear, especially when this car does do some track duty. We're going to do something interesting for the rear suspension. When we get to that point, we're going to talk about track width and some of the options for that as well. Track width is the name of the game. If you can give the car a wider base, it's always going to be more stable. There are 2 connections on the dynamic or M variable adaptive suspension. We need this little speed sensor off of the original struts. We could replace them with new ones, but these were working just fine. This little nub right here, that's the alignment mark where the spindle slides over. And I'm just labeling these now, so when I go to put it onto the spindle or knuckle, wheel carrier, whatever you like to call it, it's there. I don't have to really think twice about it. In terms of what we're doing, typically your yellow body Bilsteins are a monotube, high pressure strut, but the B16 DampTronics are actually twin tube. By the very nature, to maintain the electronic damping function, it has to be a twin tube design. So we're going to use a bump stop because these do not have the integrated bump stop that you would typically see on a yellow body Bilstein strut. So I'm actually using the factory adaptive suspension bump stop, and I'm also using the factory bellows. For now, I think it just makes sense to install it the way that it would be from the factory. Your F30 strut mounts come with the strut bearing like that as part of it. Make sure that your strut bearings are actually, you know, installed the correct way and not upside down. So sometimes I've seen them come like that. It needs to have this seat. That's actually the spring seat. And then your bellow sits over that like so. And then if you look here, this is where the spring butts up against. So, fairly straightforward. So our strut here is built. After that, I'm gonna go ahead and slide the knuckle on, and then we can go ahead and put it in the car. I'm gonna go ahead and leave the top nut loose for now. I'll actually finish tightening it down once it's in the car. Just gonna build the other side now, and yeah, pretty soon we'll actually have some nice shiny new stuff sitting in the car. So we're gonna go ahead and put our strut into the car, and just making sure we got some dowel pins here to line it up. This right here is for the cross brace, so it needs to be facing inboard here. There's also like a nice little notch here in the strut tower for that, so it can only go in one way. So here we go. All the suspension components are on, at least here on the left side. We need to still put the sway bar link on, but I'm gonna wait to do that a little bit later. We do need to torque a lot of bolts and a lot of nuts, but I'm not gonna do that until I have the other side on, because what I wanna do is just go side to side and do each one. That way I don't miss any. I'm just gonna go ahead and put the brakes here on this side, so we're gonna swap over the caliper along with the lines and everything like that. But literally we're just swapping from the yellow, dehydrated yellow, M Performance calipers to the orange M Performance calipers, which would just be 370 millimeter front rotors, semi-floating front rotor with an aluminum hat, and we're also going to be using DS 2500 brake pads on this. So a little bit more performance. When you change from your floating calipers to the M Performance calipers, you do have to do a programming change for the ABS, because that affects your brake biasing. If you don't do it, you're going to have a lot of rearward bias in the car, and that could be preferential under certain conditions, but mostly it's not. So it's important that the ABS get reprogrammed when you do the caliper swap. But we don't have to worry about that because that was already done. So this is really just a part swap at this point. I hope you're enjoying the series so far. This is just a quick reminder to let you know that all the parts we installed on Project F30 328 SI are available at fcpro.com. So head over there for all your European car needs. Now that that's out of the way, let's jump back into the action. Finished buttoning up everything here on the front left corner. Still need to do everything over there on the front right, but we have the B16 DampTronic kit installed. Again, we installed those with just your stock strut mounts for now, as we are waiting on camber plates, but it's fine for now to drive the car around on the standard strut mounts. I'm gonna go ahead and do the other side, and at that point the front will be complete. And then with that, we will then move on to the rear. And when we start working on the rear, we're gonna be removing the entire rear subframe and starting from scratch. Now we're here at the back of the car, and as you can see, the Great North has taken its toll on this diff, which is useless for us. Shockingly, the axles are still in great shape. Those are also useless for us. The subframe, it's got a nice film of brown crust on it. So, without getting into too much, because you'll see this unfold, we're not reusing any of this in the back. Literally, I'm sorry. I think we might reuse the parking brake cables. This entire rear end is basically going in the dumpster. So I'm just gonna drop the whole thing out. I'm gonna use the trans jack, lower it down, and we should have this thing out fairly quickly. I don't foresee anything preventing us from getting this out in a reasonable amount of time. And if everything goes well, which it should be able to at least get the new rear subframe and the M Performance diff installed today. So we got the whole rear end out. Like I said, pretty much this entire thing is going right in the trash with the exception of the knuckles. But here we have our rear sway bar. This is the stock rear sway bar for an F30. I'm actually not sure what that does. Yeah, it's cool. So you got plastic end links, sway bar that's maybe 8 mil in diameter. It's very puny, very weak. On top of it, we have the original subframe itself. Again, this car spent some time in the north. The entire inside of this subframe is pretty corroded, pretty rotted. Wouldn't really want to have to reuse it, particularly for a car that we're going to push around the track. And on top of that, even if I did want to reuse this subframe, we'd have to replace all the subframe mounts and the diff mounts. And that is extremely cost prohibitive. Just the tools to do that alone cost more than just replacing the subframe with a new unit, which is what we're doing. We have our new subframe here prepped, and we got some toys on here. We got some things. So right here at the center is a BMW M Performance limited slip differential. It's a 323 geared diff. This is normally the manual transmission 335i M Performance diff. So we're bumping the gear ratio from 315 to 323, so that'll be a little bit better for acceleration. But this is also a 215 millimeter diff. So it's a large case diff. So it's gonna be able to handle a little bit more power, be a little bit more robust, have a little bit extra oil in it for cooling, which is always a good thing. And on top of it, we have an assortment of 034 Motorsport goodies, including this significantly more heavy duty sway bar. This will actually do something to keep the rear of the car planted. It also is 3-way adjustable. There's 2 holes, yes, but there's 3 ways to adjust it. You can offset the holes that you use. So there's technically 3 spring rates there, or you just leave it disconnected, which in that case, there's no spring rate, but I don't know why you would do that. Maybe you're driving in the rain. On top of it, we have our 034 Motorsport billet differential mount inserts. This piece right here just kind of keeps the insert into this diff mount. And then we also have them up here at the front. So we have the rubber bushings still in the subframe, but these billet inserts take up the gap or the open space that's normally in the rubber mount and prevents unwanted flex or movement. There is going to be a slight change in NVH, but the car should still be reasonably comfortable to drive. It's just going to prevent the subframe from shifting around and moving as you drive. So really easy upgrade, and you could do it with the subframe on the car too. You could lower the subframe a little bit, put the inserts in, and 034 also includes all of the instructions on which insert goes where. So very easy to do. We kind of pre-prepped this in advance, but that's it. So this is the big upgrade for the rear. Step 1 is obviously to get this in the car, which we're going to do right now. Stay hydrated. We're on the beginning of week 3. 8 days of work on this so far, and we're gonna move on to the rear suspension, which we're using a blend of different parts. So we have the SPL, all the SPL parts for the rear, and the concept for how we're gonna do this is our arms here, I'm going to set these to the same length as the factory parts, and then these will pretty much never be adjusted, or there shouldn't be any reason to adjust them. And then our 2 control arms over here, which is our toe link, or what is replacing the factory toe link, and this upper control arm will now be our camber adjustment. The camber adjustment is done via the spring arm in a stock configuration. However, I'm using an eccentric lockout kit on that to eliminate the eccentric adjustments in the rear suspension on this. Eccentric adjustments are fine for getting a car most of the way there, but these are going to allow us a little bit of fine-tuning adjustment, and having the track width maxed out for the spring arm is also going to make the car a little bit wider too, and then we'll be able to fine-tune the camber with that upper arm. So it should be a pretty good setup in terms of getting a setup dialed in, and kind of show you what I'm doing here in terms of getting these pre-adjusted. The really nice thing about SPL products, and we do sell these at FCP Euro, they're pretty much completely rebuildable. Every single one of these parts has a part number that you can buy from SPL, but they use FK rod ends, which are made here in the USA. So if one of these rod ends wears out, which they typically do, they are Teflon lined, but when they do wear out, you could just replace that bearing as opposed to the entire arm. You should never have to replace the entire arm, even if this somehow were to bend, or the turnbuckle were to bend, which would be insane. You'd have to hit something real hard to do that. We can basically reuse these parts in perpetuity. So, the other really nice thing I like about SPL's arms is they use this, instead of jam nuts, which always tend to come loose, they have these collars that squeeze down on the end of the adjustment here, and that pretty much locks this in place so it can't spin. It's a really nice design. Also, these are always easy to get to. You can never really get to jam nuts once they're on the car sometimes. So now the trick on this, it's a little bit about feel, right? So if I keep going on this, it's going to get really, really tight. And you can see that this is starting to get pushed away. We don't want to do that. We want this to be adjusted in a spot where there's not really any tension on either end, either rod end. And then once we're where we want to be, I'll just tighten these buckles down. So that one's done. This one's done. So take these, we'll go ahead and put them on the car, start hanging them at least. I have a brand new lower camber arm here. This is what the spring typically sits on, and there would be a big eccentric bolt and eccentric washer here to adjust the camber. So this effectively changes the track width of the rear suspension. You can see I can slide this in and out. So what I'm gonna do is I have these 4mm offset shims, which are going to replace the eccentric, and I'm going to maximize the track width of this lower arm. So no longer using the eccentric adjustment at the subframe to do anything with camber. I'm simply going to maximize this all the way out, and then this upper control arm here from SPL is going to then be used to adjust the camber. So I'm going to go ahead and get the car as wide as it can be, and then utilize the upper control arm for camber adjustment, which is a threaded adjustment, which is going to be a little bit more of a fine adjustment than you would be able to get with the eccentric bolt. So this is a nice, easy solution to set up the car for a little bit more accuracy in terms of alignment. I mean, the fact of the matter is, another thing to consider, when you push a car really hard, the eccentric adjustments can move over time. So, you know, whatever the car is today may not be that way at the end of a track day or autocross day. The eccentric bolts can move and shift around. So this eliminates that possibility altogether. So with all that said, I'm gonna go ahead and just put these control arms on the car, and we're gonna go ahead and move on to some of the other stuff. We'll talk about the drive shaft a little bit as well, because if you get the drive shaft in, it does fit with the big diff, which is nice, so we don't have to order a different drive shaft. But yeah, this is really starting to come together. So one thing I found on the other side, remember we adjusted these control arms here to the factory length. That's fine. Our toe link and camber arm are going to need to be adjusted a lot in order to get everything to line up, which is fine. It was kind of expected. The flanges for our guiding link here is a little bit thicker than the original part, so I'm just using a slightly longer bolt to compensate for that. Oh, another thing that we added too, SPL makes a bearing that presses in here in the knuckle. These used to be just sort of these old tired rubber bushings. Put these bearings in. I will say they pressed in really, really, really hard. The bearing is inside of an aluminum housing, and when you press aluminum into steel, the steel will always win. Even though I oiled the inside of that, what we ended up having to do is, as we're pressing that in, I had somebody here helping me. They were basically tapping one of the press cups with a hammer, just gently, to create vibration that was freeing up the nut on the other side so I can turn it. I mean, these things went in hard. It's just something to keep in mind. However, bearing here, we got the factory ball joint there. The only thing in the back suspension right now that's still a rubber pivot is this inboard bushing here on the lower camber arm. We are looking for a better solution for that, but for now, we're just gonna leave that as is. I'm okay with that. Yeah, it's kind of interesting how this all come together. So it's funny because the outer CV joint, like the spline portion that goes to the hub, that's the same. The part that goes into the differential, it's not the same. Gone for heavy duty. It's probably overkill because even with the power increase and the automatic transmission, I don't ever think you're going to put that much shock load in the drivetrain. But the gearing was preferential, plus having a larger axle. You know, if you get these things hot on track, you're not going to. There's more grease in these things. They're heavier duty. So all of this was to bulletproof the car as much as possible using the BMW parts bin.
When it comes down to it, the SI badge isn't representative of a car focused around making massive horsepower. It revolved around a well-balanced car that could hold its own both in the corners and on the straights. All the upgrades we've done to the suspension as well as the differential should create an incredibly planted car that handles predictably at the limit. So far, these upgrades have been decently hardcore and seriously performance focused to help the car drive and perform around the track just as well as it doubled as a reliable daily. But we also want to make sure the car sounds up to snuff too. Even though it came with an aftermarket performance exhaust, it just didn't have the right sound and grunt we wanted. So we installed a Ramus performance exhaust, allowing the otherwise muted N20 to sing the song of its people and flow more freely, while also not being totally offensive.
So everything in the rear is tightened down with the exception of the sway bar links. I'm going to do that next off camera. I'm also going to put the aero shield back underneath the camber arm here. I chose to use that to secure the wheel speed sensor wires as opposed to zip tying them. Help kind of clean up the look anyway. Plus they do provide a benefit and a function, so I'm just going to put that back on. And then really after that, I'm going to go back to the front. I did have this car on the ground over the weekend with wheels on, everything, and it looked great.
So as we mentioned not too long ago, we're going to be putting these Apex SM10 wheels on the car. It's going to look absolutely awesome, and since the F30 is almost ready to be put back on the ground, I'm going to get these wheels mounted up with the Toyo tires, and I'm going to show you in a moment. But first, simple thing, we just need to put some TPMS back in the car so that it doesn't scream at us, because it's a modern car and they all scream at you if you have the slightest pressure imbalance on TPMS. And we're using these Autel MX sensors that we sell on the site. They're universal, and also they're way less expensive than the BMW ones. I think these are like 15 or 20 bucks a piece, whereas the BMW ones that we sell for that car, even the OEM ones, are like $40+. So no brainer, you can program these pretty easily with the Autel machine. And I'm going to pop these in real quick and get it on the tire machine, and then we'll talk about the tires real fast. All right, so wheel is all set up, ready to go on the machine. TPMS is in, we're ready to put the tire on. These are the sticky boys that Toyo sent us over. These are the Proxy R1R tires, so it's your typical kind of 200 tread wear. Really good at street competence and also getting rain out with these cool sipes that dispel the rain out to the side. But of course, also being a 200 tread wear, pretty sticky tire, you know, UHP type stuff, this is gonna be really good on track. So this car, being a street and track car, needed some street and track tires, and I think we got a good fit with these Toyos.
So I stayed late last night and finished up installing all the parts on the car. The new OE fenders are on, which is a much cleaner look in my opinion. I'm sure some people do like those 4 Series F80 style fenders, but not for me, not for this build. Overall, I think the car looks pretty good, aside from the fact that it's filthy, minus the new quarter panels. Even though this car had the aftermarket M Sport bumper on it, all of the factory trim pieces fit up to it perfectly fine. Everything lines up. Overall, I think it looks pretty nice. The suspension does need to settle a little bit. We'll go ahead and give the car a shakedown after we've confirmed that the ride height is good or acceptable. It's gonna need an alignment pretty badly, so we're gonna go ahead and take this car over to our friends at Bootsy Gear, which is like literally right across the road, right across the post road here in Milford. We'll go ahead and put a nice alignment on this car for us so it can drive straight. And after that, we'll see what it really feels like to drive. Pretty excited.